Okay, hello and welcome to the MSDynamicsWorld.com Fall 2014 Financial Automation Webcast Series. I'm Jason Gumpert, and joining us today is a returning speaker, Jared Hall of Microsoft. Jared is a program manager for Dynamics GP, and he is a frequent community contributor. We are really excited to have him joining us today to talk about Dynamics GP Workflow 2.0. We invite you to add your feedback and ask Jared questions today. He'll be saving time at the end of the presentation. You can also use the chat block or the Q&A block that you see to the right to enter in your questions and feedback. So without further delay, I am happy to welcome Jared Hall.
Thanks, Jason. As Jason mentioned, I'm Jared Hall. I'm a program manager for Microsoft in the Fargo, North Dakota office. And it's a balmy 46 degrees up here this morning, so I'm happy to be on the phone with you. I hope it's warmer where you are. But happy to be talking about workflow. And as you see on the slide there, it says Microsoft Dynamics GP Workflow 2.0. We had in prior releases, prior to GP 2013 R2, we have a workflow system that's available. But a few releases back, we realized there were some issues with it. We're getting some feedback from customers that there's some things that needed to be improved with it. So we made those improvements in GP 2013 R2, and that's what we want to talk about here on this call today, on this webinar, the improvements that we made and the system that's going forward. I see in the comment section there's a few comments about not being able to hear. Is that can everyone hear? Are we okay with volume? Jason, can you hear me? Okay, so I see a comment saying you can hear me, so I'll go ahead and move on. So before we get too far into the presentation, I want to talk about just workflow in general. I think in financials, there's an understanding of what workflow is, but there's a little bit different understanding from different perspectives. So I want to talk about what is workflow from a Dynamics GP standpoint. When we talk about workflow, we talk about processes and primarily approvals, tasks, and actions that must happen before you can complete an action within Dynamics GP. So for example, I have on the screen a flow chart that shows a workflow that has to happen before you can post a requisition document. So if we're creating a requisition, the final action down at the bottom, down at that green check mark, that's the action that we take where we can post that document, where we can create a purchase order from the requisition, where we can start moving forward and taking action on that document. But before that happens, we have a few things that we want to take place before we can go ahead and post a document. So we set up a workflow of actions and approvals that have to happen before we allow the clerk to go ahead and create a purchase order. And that's what we see here on the screen, that for this company, in the example that we use in this presentation, we have a requisition clerk, Gloria, and we want her to be the person that goes in and selects a vendor and makes sure that we have the right vendor selected for that requisition. We also have some approvals that we want to take place before we can complete the document. We want Phyllis, the manager, we want her to look at it if it's greater than $5,000. Just to make sure that everything is okay. And if it's greater than $25,000, after Phyllis approves it, we also want a director to look at it to make sure that it's okay. And once she approves it, then we can go ahead and complete the document. So that's what we mean by workflow in Dynamics GP. When we redesigned the system, we had a few goals in mind, so our workflow goals. And so as we were preparing and doing all the research and design for new features for Dynamics GP workflow, we looked at a few things, and this is what we came up with. The first one is web client, that whatever system we created in moving forward with workflow in Dynamics GP, it had to be compatible with our web client. As everything is moving to the cloud, we wanted to make sure that our workflow system was also compatible with that cloud technology. Also, the second point there is we wanted to remove our SharePoint dependency. For those of you who are familiar with our workflow system in prior versions of Dynamics GP, you know that there was a heavy dependency on SharePoint. Our designer was built in SharePoint. We were using SharePoint for the workflow engine. We're using SharePoint for our notifications. We were using SharePoint for our timer technology. So there's a lot of integration there with SharePoint. And that was also creating a few problems. We found that when there were issues in SharePoint, it caused problems for our whole system, and we had a dependency there that overall we just needed to move away from and get rid of. So that was one of our top goals, is getting away from that dependency on another technology. We also wanted to improve the design experience. As I mentioned, our designer was based in SharePoint, and so it was basically a web page, just a list of fields that you needed to enter. And it wasn't a terrible experience, but we thought we could improve that experience, make it a little bit easier and a little bit more intuitive to set up and design your workflows. And finally, the increased flexibility. For that point, if you've worked with our prior versions, we had a list of workflow types that you could work with, and we wanted to extend that list to make sure that the system is more flexible and expand into additional areas of the system. And down the road in future releases, we also want to make it flexible enough for users to create their own workflow types. So that's a goal that we have for future releases. But as we go through this presentation, we'll see the ones that are available in the current release and workflow types. We'll talk about workflow types that are going to be expanded for the upcoming release in GP 2015. And that's due out in fall. So workflow maintenance. With those 4 goals in mind, as we're talking about the 4 things that we wanted to do with this new system, the thing that, after researching and talking to customers and partners and going through a long list of discussions with various people and stakeholders, we decided that ultimately our goal was the best solution for solving these 4 goals was to scrap our old system completely and build a new system from scratch. So in GP 2013 R2, we've completely redesigned the system, workflow system, with a custom workflow engine based entirely within our Dexterity code. So that workflow engine is designed and built there, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And we'll start with looking at workflow maintenance. So in workflow maintenance, this is where you would set up your new workflows. And in maintenance, we have 3 levels of setting up workflows. We have our workflow types, workflows, and workflow steps. Workflow types is essentially a document type. So for example, we have a requisition, we have a purchase order, we have a payables batch, we have a receivables batch. Those are our document types, and we have workflows attached to that type. So there are processes around that document for which we can set up workflows and workflow processes. For each workflow, we can set up as many workflows as we need to, with different steps, different approvals, different tasks. Only one of those can be active at any given time, but if we want to experiment and set up different ones, activate and deactivate different ones at different times, we have that flexibility. And then we can set up as many steps per workflow as we need to. And we'll look at how that's done in just a couple minutes here. Before we do that, just want to talk briefly about the workflow types that we have available. In GP 2013 R2, we have 4 workflow types that are available. And you see those on the left there. And the reason we don't have too many available in GP 2013 R2 is that most of our development effort was put into redesigning the system, in building that workflow engine, building the architecture, and getting that extended out into the system. So with that new system, we were only able to build those 4 workflow types that you see listed there on the slide that are available in GP 2013 R2. For GP 2015, we have several more that are coming out, and we'll work on future releases, releasing more as the need arises. So we have 9 workflow types that are coming out in GP 2015. So we'll have quite a few that are available, expanding out the flexibility of the system, and replacing, in GP 2015, we'll have a replacement for SharePoint, or SharePoint workflow system. So when you install GP 2015, the prior workflow system that's based in SharePoint will no longer be available. So with that discussion, I want to jump over into Dynamics GP and talk about the system that we have available. So this is Dynamics GP 2015 R2. And
hey, Jared, if I could just jump in for for one
Sure.
moment with a technical note. If anyone is seeing the screen looking a little bit fuzzy, if you look up in the upper right of the window and you see a magnifying glass with a plus sign in it, and you click on that and select the original size, it might make the display a little clearer. So that's the magnifying glass in the upper right of the screen. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Jason. Okay, so looking at desktop, the first thing we want to look at when we're setting up our workflows is workflow maintenance. So in workflow maintenance, from your administration page, looking at setup, we want to go down to workflow maintenance. And this is our new workflow maintenance window, the design experience for setting up workflows. If we want to see which workflow types are available for different modules and areas of the system, you click the drop-down list. We can see that we have one for payroll, we have one for project. For this demo, we're going to look primarily at the requisition, purchase requisition approval workflow type. And you see that I have a few workflows already set up for this workflow type. The green checkbox says that requisition 4 is my active workflow for this workflow type right now. But we're going to walk through and show the steps that you would use to set up a new workflow for this workflow type. So select the workflow type in the navigation tree, click New Workflow, and that creates a new workflow for us to walk through and set up the type. So I'm going to just call this one, I'll call it Requisition 5 for simplicity, give it a name and a description. And we have quite a few options that are available for setting up and determining how steps are walked through for this workflow. I want to talk about each of these individually. Under the Options menu, we have, the first one is Send Notifications for Completed Tasks. There are two types of notifications that are available with Dynamics GP Workflow. The first one is a notification for actions that have been completed for the workflow. And that's what this checkbox is referring to. So for example, if a document is approved, then a notification can be sent back to the originator saying this document has been approved. You can now go back in, work with it, and it's just an email notification sent to the originator notifying them that the action has taken place. When you mark that checkbox saying we want action completed notifications to be available, we activate the expansion box where we can open up and determine for which of these steps or actions within the workflow we want a notification to be sent to the originator. So if I only want to be notified or receive a notification when something's been recalled, edited, escalated, or final approved, I can mark those and select a template that'll generate an email and send it back to the originator at the time that that action takes place. I can also send a carbon copy to anyone else within our Active Directory. So if I want to send a notification to Sarah saying the same thing, I can add her, and now she'll also get that same message when the action is completed. We can also set up templates for this, but we'll talk about the templates when we talk about our other notifications coming up. But those are all customizable. We can determine what message gets sent and customize the message that is sent out to the originator and to whoever gets copied. So we'll click OK on that. Allow approver to delegate tasks. One of the actions that is available to an approver, someone who has assigned an approval task for this workflow, is to delegate that task to another individual or group. And that we only include that action and make that action available to the approver if this checkbox is marked. So you have the option on whether or not that action is available to the approver. The third checkbox is Allow originator to be an approver. And what this does is it allows you to determine whether or not the person that submits the document to workflow can also be included as an approver within that workflow step, or within the workflow. And the scenario that this enables is allowing you to have a group of individuals who are originating documents and approving documents. For example, I have two users. They're my general ledger batch entry people. So I have Joe and Sarah. And these Joe and Sarah are the people that enter and review general ledger batches before they get posted. but I want all of Joe's batches that he enters. Every time he enters a batch, I want Sarah to be the one to approve it. And every time Sarah enters a batch, I want Joe to be the one to approve it. So they are approving each other's batches and taking a look at that. So if I unmark this checkbox to say allow originator to be an approver, I can include both Joe and Sarah as approvers for the step. But if Joe is the approver, he gets the originator, then he's not allowed to approve. Sarah has to be the one to do it. So we can create one step, add two approvers, but it still makes that check to make sure that the person who originates the batch isn't also the one that's being the approver. The fourth checkbox is to always require at least one approver. And this checkbox is kind of a catch-all that says we always want somebody to approve this batch, regardless of the steps that we set up. So I want to jump back to the slides for just a second. To talk about how this checkbox works. So for the always require at least one approver, we can set up steps with conditions that say whatever the conditions are that are needed to ensure that there's somebody that approves that document. And for this one, we're going to say we submit a sales order, and we're going to say if the country that we're shipping to for this sales order is Canada, then we want Phyllis to be the one to look at it. If the country is USA, then we want Sarah to approve it, and that's 99.9% of all our sales are to US and Canada. So we want two steps, making sure that we define who those are. But if we want to have a catch-all that says we need somebody to approve it in case there's a shipment to Mexico, there's a shipment to Europe, or some other country. If that checkbox is unmarked saying, oh, for the always require at least one approver, then we're going to look at this and say, oh, country's not Canada, Phyllis doesn't need to approve. Oh, country's not Sarah, Sarah doesn't need to approve. And we'll just go through to no approval needed. The document can be completed without approval. No one needs to look at it. But if we have that checkbox marked to always require at least one approver, the workflow engine will analyze all the steps, see if there's someone within those steps who needs to approve it. If there's not, then it will send it to the alternate final approver and just say, you're the alternate final approver. Other steps didn't find an approver, so you are the one that needs to review and approve this document. So it ends up being kind of a catch-all for the workflow steps. If you want to define an alternate final approver, you would mark the Use Alternate Final Approver checkbox. We can go back to that lookup for workflow user selection. We'll talk about the details of this window when we get to steps, but we can select a user and select that person for the alternate final approver. The alternate final approver can act kind of as an intermediate before the workflow manager. So I want to save this for a second and show you where the workflow manager is set up. So we just saved requisition 5. If we go back up to the purchase requisition approval workflow type, you see that there's one option for this workflow type that can be changed. You'll need to define a manager for the workflow type. And the manager is the person that kind of has all power for this workflow. The workflow manager can set up new workflows, change steps as needed, and set those up. The workflow manager also has approval or completion authority over any steps that are created for a workflow for that workflow type. So if a document gets submitted and gets assigned to Phyllis to approve the document, it's sitting out there in limbo waiting for Phyllis, and she's on vacation. Nobody knows that she's out of the office for 2 weeks. The workflow manager can go into the system and take action against those steps. That person has the authority to take action against any steps regardless of who the approver is. So I've set myself up as the workflow manager for this workflow. Let's go back to the workflow and talk about the last option that is available for the workflow options. And that's when a task is overdue. And this is what happens when we need to escalate a task. So on the steps, when we show the options for the steps, we'll see that you can set a deadline for how long the approver has to complete that action. So if you want to say they have 1 day or 1 hour to complete that task, that's a deadline gets set for the task when it's generated. So an email gets sent to Phyllis. She has 1 hour to complete the task. But what happens if she doesn't complete that task within an hour? The options that we have are to take no action, which is essentially pretend that there is no deadline. It just keeps going forward. The next one is to escalate to the next approver. And that is if there is a step following the step for which it's generated, then we'll escalate to the approver of the next step. So let's go back to the slide deck quickly and see what that means by going back to our diagram. So in this diagram, if Ken submits a document, and it goes to Phyllis, it's greater than $5,000. Phyllis receives an approval task, and she needs to approve it within an hour. If we have the escalate to next approver option set, and Phyllis doesn't complete that assignment, then there is the step for Sarah to approve it immediately after Phyllis does. And so we escalate to the next approver, who is Sarah. Even if the document is not greater than $25,000, which is the condition that we would have set on that step, we still escalate to Sarah, just saying it's been escalated to you because Phyllis was out of the office or Phyllis didn't complete the task and we had to escalate it. So that's the option that we have available for escalating to next approver. We also have the option to escalate to a specific person. So if I mark the checkbox escalate to, I can click the lookup, select a specific person, and have that person be the individual who receives the assignment if we need to escalate. And then the fourth one is, if the task isn't completed, automatically reject the overdue task. I'm just going to keep it a take no action for this demo. So those are the options that we have for our workflow. Once we have our options selected, then we can go start setting up steps for the workflow. So I'll save this, and with our workflow selected in the workflow navigation tree, we click New Step to create a step. The first one that we had in our diagram was for Aaron . Hey, Jason, can you hear me? I just got a notice that there was a problem with my audio device. So I just want to double check.
I can still hear you.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Yep.
So in our diagram, we had Gloria be our first, she's the clerk who is going to select the vendor for each requisition. So we're going to say, for our step, select vendor. We can give it a description. And there are two step types. The first one is an approval, which means the person who receives this task assignment has to approve it. And that means that changing this changes the actions that are available to the user. So if it's an approval step type, then the actions that are available are approve, reject, or delegate. If it is a task type, that's not an approval, that's just a task that needs to be completed. And that's what Gloria is going to be doing here. She receives a notification saying requisition has been entered. You need to select the vendor for it. It gives her the information. And she takes care of the task, and then the action that she has to take against that is task complete rather than approve or reject. And once she selects task complete, her task is done. It gets removed from her list of things to do, and she can move on to her next task. For each of these steps, we can select a condition under which the condition under which that step must be run. For this, we want Gloria to always select a vendor. She's the one who has to review the vendor, make sure it's the right vendor, and move on. She wants for every requisition document that gets entered. So we're not going to select a condition. We're going to say action is always required for this step. After we've selected the condition, then we go down to the bottom and select the assignment. To whom is this action going to be assigned? And this is where we want to talk about the workflow user selection window. There are a few different ways that we can make this assignment, and all of them are based on Active Directory users, your Windows Active Directory. And the reason we went with Windows Active Directory rather than GP users is we did not want approvers or individuals taking tasks, performing tasks against workflows to be limited only to GP users. There are scenarios where someone outside of GP, who is not always a GP user, will be taking action against those steps. We wanted to allow that scenario. So we have a few selection types. The first one is people and groups. And if we select people and groups, that means people or security groups from within Active Directory. So for this one, I can say GP WF Gloria. It goes out into Active Directory, finds that user, and I can add her to the list. If I am not sure of what her alias is or how she's identified within Active Directory, I can just start typing. We'll just go GPWF. These are some of our test users that we have in here. We can see it gives us the list, and we can scroll down and select the user. The security group is another option. So if I want to select purchase order group for workflow, in this example, we'll just say we have a group of individuals who do our purchase order entry. And it changes every once in a while, and we have some turnover in that group. So rather than having to come in here and update our workflow steps every time there's a change in who the approver is, we can just select that security group and have that be the web method that we use for assigning that workflow assignment. So at the time a document is entered and this step is run, we'll go into Active Directory, find all of the users that are in that security group at the time the step is run, and make the assignment to all users within that security group. So you have that option rather than defining individuals. So we have Gloria entered. Let's talk about some of the other options that we have for making this assignment. The next one is hierarchy. We have the option to walk up the Active Directory hierarchy, finding managers as a method of doing the assignment. So for example, let's say that Ken enters a requisition document, and we want, or somebody, an individual enters a requisition document, and whoever that individual is, we want that person's manager to be the approver, or have a review task or an assignment assigned to that person, to him. So we select from whom to walk up the hierarchy and select the manager or how many levels up the hierarchy to walk. So if I want the originator's manager to be the approver, I can select workflow originator, assign to direct manager. I could assign to skip level manager if I want to go 2 steps up the hierarchy, or define a number of levels. You can go up as high as you need to, depending on how many levels there are in your organization's hierarchy, up to the top. It'll stop at the top at your CEO or whoever's at the top level. Another scenario would be to go from requested by. So for requisitions, we have a requisition role within that document that's captured within that document that says Ken may be entering this document, but the items that he's requesting are actually for Joe. So Ken is requesting a computer for Joe, and we want Joe's manager to be the one that is the approver. So even though Joe isn't entering the document, he's not the originator, we want his manager to be the approver. So we walk up the hierarchy from the requested by role. So there are a few options that we have there in determining who the approver is for based on hierarchies. And then the last one is just to select a specific workflow role. So this is the same as the start from. We have our workflow manager, alternate final approver, requested by, and line requested by, which are 2 roles for the requisition document. And there are different roles for different documents based on the workflow type. So let's go back to people and groups. We're just going to enter Gloria. She'll be our approver, or person that completes the task, and go from there. We're going to leave our time limit at 8 hours. We talked about what time limits do for escalation. The three options that we have for denominations of time, we have hours, days, and weeks. In the prior version, we only had days as the only option. We expanded that out to make it a little bit more flexible and allow smaller increments of time. So you can get down to as little as 1 hour for the time limit that an individual has to complete their workflow assignment. We can also apply the workflow calendar to that deadline. Applying the workflow calendar allows you to define work hours and work days over which the time limit should be incremented. So we'll go look at that window here quickly. So back on the home page, below workflow maintenance, we have the workflow calendar. And in the workflow calendar, this lets us set up our work days and non-work days. So the days that we typically work, our company will just say that we work Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So we'll mark those days and mark our start times and end times. And those are the days that we're typically in the office, and those are the times that we want users to be working on workflow tasks. And we can also say which days we're not in the office. So when I set a time limit, let's say, for example, I have a 4-hour time limit on a workflow task. If I submit a document at 3 p.m. on a Friday, I don't want it to expire at 7 p.m. on Friday because that person won't be in the office, and others who would be escalated to probably won't be in the office. So rather than having it expire at 7, we want to apply the workflow calendar. It increments until 5 and then skips over to the next Monday morning and continues incrementing. So the task assignment will actually expire at 10 o'clock on Monday morning rather than 7 p.m. on Friday. Gives flexibility on when those assignments will hit their deadlines. So coming back to workflow maintenance and setting up that step, the last option that we have here is to send a message. So for this person that received the assignment, do we want a message to be sent to them? And this is the second type of workflow notification. We talked about the workflow action completed notification when we talked about workflow options. This is the workflow assignment notification. So when the assignment is made, we send a notification to that individual saying, you just received an assignment. We have default templates set up. So when I mark this checkbox, we'll enter a default template with some default messages that we have set up for this assignment. That makes it easier. So out of the box, you have a quick way to quickly set up these workflow steps. But this is also very customizable. So let's look at workflow messages and how we can set those up. So right now we have the workflow assigned PO rec approval. If I click send message, that opens our message setup window, and we can see what is that message that's going to be sent out when the assignment is made. And you might recognize this. This is the same window that we used in previous versions for sending out email notifications for purchase orders and sales orders and other standard document types, but we've modified it in GP 2013 R2 to be able to handle some workflow information. So if you're familiar with it in prior versions, some of the differences you'll notice are that we've added this message type. Standard messages are the standard messages for documents from prior versions. We've added workflow assignment and workflow action completed notifications as message types. If we have a workflow assignment, this is purchasing, and we have the workflow type that allows us to select those document fields and include document fields within that email message. Down in the body, you'll notice that we have both document fields saying required date, document amount. Those are fields that are related specifically to the document. What we've added in GP 2013 R2 is the ability to add workflow fields as well. So if I select workflow fields from the radio button down here, then this drop-down list gives me a list of fields that are specific to the workflow for that document. And those field examples are examples for that are action deadline is one, saying that you have until this time to complete that action. We have the workflow step name is another example, and some workflow comments. So when I submit a document, I can enter comments, those and some of these other fields here that are specific to the workflow for the document rather than the document itself can be included as fields within that email message that gets sent out. Another exciting change is that within the document fields, we can include document line fields. So that's added as an option here in the drop-down list, that we can add document line fields. And the reason we added this is that we wanted to make sure that there's enough detail in this email message about the document that an approver can take action and make a decision on taking action against that document from an email. We don't need to drill into GP. We don't need to open up a list or another report to get that information to know whether or not we can approve it. We can see the document line information. We can see the document header information and make a decision straight from our email. So if I have the document line fields data field indicator included in the body of the email, that means I need to decide which line fields I want to be included in that table. So we've added this tab that's over here where you can select the document lines tab and select from the available fields for that line fields for that document which ones are going to be included in the table. And then these fields will be included when the email gets sent out. We'll insert a table into the body of that message with the information for those lines for that field, for those fields for the lines of the document. And then last thing to talk about is this workflow action list. When the email gets sent out, if that workflow action list data field indicator is included in the body of the message, what we do is we find which actions are available to that user: approve, reject, delegate, or task complete, reject, delegate, whatever those actions are that are assigned to that individual. We include a hyperlink directly in the email where they can click that hyperlink and perform the action straight from the email rather than having to log into GP or perform it from another place. So those are the options that we have for setting up and customizing your email messages that get sent out as either assignments or workflow action completed notifications. So I'm just using the default WF assign PO rec approval message, and that'll be sent out when we submit a document. The last option here is completion policy. So let's say that I included an entire security group, Active Directory security group, as the approvers for this step. Completion policy would say only run response determines how many of the people within that group need to complete it for it to be considered completed. So for example, if there are 20 people within that security group and I say only one response is needed, then only one person that receives the assignment has to complete it. Then that step is considered completed, marked off. It can move to the next step in the workflow. If the majority must take action, then 11 people from that group must take action for it to be completed and move to the next step in the workflow. If all must take action, then all 20 of those individuals must take action. So those are the options for determining whether or not we can move to the next step in the workflow and say that this step is completed. So those are our options. We'll click Save, and we see that our workflow navigation tree is updated to show that we have our select vendor step included in the workflow. And we'll quickly just walk through and set up the other steps that we had for this workflow type. So we'll say new step. The first one was manager approval. Phyllis must approve if greater than $5,000. And this is an approval step. The order determines in which order the step happens within the workflow. If this is a first step, then it's going to happen at the same level as the select vendor. So when we submit a document, both of these steps will be assigned at the same time. If I wanted this step to come after the select vendor, I would say this step follows a selected step, and it gives me a list of all the steps that are available at that or in the workflow and already saved. I want this one to be a first step, so it follows our flow chart. For setting a condition, this one we only want to run if the document is greater than $5,000. So action is required only when the following condition is met, and then I click the arrow to open up our condition editor and determine what is that condition. This gives us a list of all the fields. Well, a list of the fields related to the document. What we did for this list is we selected the list of fields that we thought would be the most common fields used for setting conditions. So it's kind of a limited list, so it doesn't become overwhelming. If you don't see the field that you want in this list, what you can do is mark the Display Extended Field List checkbox, and that extends out to show every field linked to that document. So you can set a condition based on any field on that document. I'm going to select the limited list, look for document amount, and I'm going to say if the document amount is greater than or equal to 5,000, and add that condition to the list. And we could add as many conditions as we need, say and, or, and expand that out to a tree of conditions if we need to. But I'm going to keep it simple and just say if it's greater than 5,000. If you need to edit or delete, we have options there. One other option is to compare it to a field value rather than a constant. So if I want to say, if the line description is equal or greater than or is equal to another field on that document, I have that option rather than comparing it to a constant. We can compare two fields. So if your tax amount is greater than your freight amount and you want a condition set on that, you have that flexibility to compare it to a different field. For this one, I'm just going to say if it's greater than 5,000, enter that. We now have our condition set. I'll select my user. And save the step. And then the last step is if document amount is greater than 25,000, okay, we'll assign this one to Sarah. And save. And that's our workflow. We would then, if this is the workflow that we wanted to be active, we would go back up here and mark it as active. For this one, I already have an active workflow, and I'm going to keep this one as active for the next demo because it has, I am listed as an approver, and I want to show some of the actions that are available to you when you are assigned action for the workflow. So we're going to save that, close it, and now we can go into our requisition entry window and see how the workflow assignments work. So this is purchase requisition entry. Under purchasing, transactions, purchase requisition. And I can enter a new number. But you'll notice up here at the top, because workflow is activated for this workflow type, we have the workflow group on our ribbon at the top. That gives us the actions that are available for this document for me specifically. So it recognizes my Active Directory user and knows which actions are available to me for this document for the workflow. So when I enter this, we'll just say description, we're going to buy some Xboxes. We'll go through this fairly quickly. The requisition entry window is also new in GP 2013 R2, but I won't go too deep into the functionality of the window itself. We have a separate session that Teresa Nisler does on this window if you have additional questions on the requisition functionality specifically. We'll just talk about the workflow functionality itself. So I'm going to say Xboxes, I want to buy 15 of them. They're $3.99 each. all my information is entered, I can click Submit. And it pops up this window saying, workflow action, do you have any comments? Let's buy these quickly. And I can submit, and that submits the document to workflow. So I am now the originator of this document, and it's also going to assign me as an approver. You notice up here at the top, there's also a workflow, what we call the workflow info bar, that gives information on the document itself. So if I pull this document back up, it shows the status for the document. So this is the document I just submitted. I now have different actions available to me. Because I'm an approver, I have approve, reject, and delegate. It shows me the status, it shows me the deadline, and there's also another step. So if there's more than one pending step, I can scroll through the steps for that document. We can see that Gloria also has a task assigned to her for this pending step, for this pending action. I can also now open up history and see what is the history for this document, and click through and see what the comments are, what the steps are, and what's been done to, up to this point for the document. So there's a few ways that I can take action now, now that I've been assigned action for this document. The first one is directly from this window. If I'm a GP user, I can open up the window and I can pull up documents one at a time individually and approve, reject, delegate, or take whatever action needs to be done against this document. Let's look at some of the other options that we have available. If we go to purchasing, we have navigation lists that allow you to take action more quickly against a large number of documents. So if I go to purchase requisitions pending approval, from navigation list, this is a good method to look at a lot of documents quickly, get the detail we need on them from the frame down at the bottom, showing the detail for them, and then mark the checkbox to take action against a large number of them. Check, 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 mark those, and then I have my workflow actions available at the top of the window. So I can approve, recall, reject, delegate. Whichever actions are available for those documents at that time, I can take those actions against a large number of documents. Another notification method is on my home page. So if I go to my home page, if you mark your setup, it shows all of the approvals and tasks that are assigned to me. So I have my workflow tasks. These are all the documents that I have assigned to me. I can see them. They're on my home page. I can click them. It'll open up the associated window and pull up the document so I can start taking action against it. And then the last one is email. So if I go back to my email, I see that this email message was just sent to me with the information for that document that was submitted. So, and it's based on the template that we looked at earlier. So all of the fields are filled in. This is the table showing me the line items for those documents. My comments are included there, and I can take action directly from here because of these hyperlinks that are included here. So if I want to approve this, what it does is it calls into the workflow engine, determines, does a few checks to make sure that I have security, that I have the rights to take the action, and if I do, it sends back this web page to me and opens it up so I can enter comments and take the action. I clicked approve, so it shows me the approve button. If I click delegate, then it gives me this window where I can type in, and that'll go in and into Active Directory and check to make sure that that user, and I can delegate to that specific user. For this one, I'll reject it. Say reject. It says your rejection has been submitted for this workflow step. So now if I go back into GP, and I'm going to do it from the drill back here, we include a hyperlink in the email where if I click that, it opens up the window in GP and pulls up the document. We can see that the requisition was rejected by Jared Hall. And once it is approved, once it walks through all those steps, we could purchase the requisition and create a PO from it. But at this point, it's been rejected, so we would have to go back, and those actions aren't available to us. The last window that I want to talk about is out-of-office delegations, the one last option that we have available here. So if we go to the home page and user preferences, this is available to individual users. So if I know I'm going to be out of the office for 2 weeks, I'm going to GPUG Summit in October, I don't want assignments to come to me that I know are going to expire because I'm out of the office, I can set up my workflow delegations. So I click the workflow delegation button from user preferences, and it opens up my workflow user delegation window. And I can delegate tasks for myself as an individual, and I can say automatically delegate my workflow tasks. And I can either say delegate all my tasks for all workflow types to the same person, or for each workflow type, I want to delegate to a different person. So for purchase order approval, I want it to go to Sarah. For purchase requisition, I want it to go to Phyllis. And I can have those assignments go to different individuals, and I can set the start and end date for which those delegations will happen. If I'm the workflow manager, which I am for this one, then I can also, if I'm the workflow manager, which if you'll remember from the workflow maintenance, I'm set up as the workflow manager for this for workflow type, I can start setting up delegations for another individual. So if I know somebody on my team is going to be out of the office, that person doesn't have access to GP to set up their own user preferences, I can come in here and set up the user preferences for that individual. So GPWF, Sarah, and now I can set up delegations for Sarah. If I'm not a workflow manager, then this field is grayed out, it's locked, and you can only set up your own delegations. So looking through that, those are the options that we have available based on all the feedback that we received on our prior versions of workflow for prior to GP 2013 R2. We feel like we've expanded the flexibility of the system. We've made it a little bit more user-friendly. We've removed our SharePoint dependency and accomplished those goals that we were looking at for this new system. And the feedback that we've gotten so far on it has been fairly positive, but looking forward to your questions and comments and feedback on it as well. As we go forward into future releases, we're always looking for feedback on ways that we can improve the system and make it more flexible to work for your needs. So we'll open it up for questions. It looks like we have a little bit of time left here. Any questions that we have available? I think Jason might act as moderator, but I'll look at those as well. You can type those into the Q&A section.
Yeah, and we've had quite a few come in already, Jared.
Okay.
Happy to sort of help you get it going here.
But yeah, I haven't been looking at the questions, so if you want to throw those out.
Yeah, there's, you know, a good number. I don't know. Are you able to stay beyond the top of the hour, or
sure.
Do we just have about 7 minutes? Because I believe you'll probably need a few extra minutes.
I can stay beyond the top of the hour, but also I put my email address there on the screen. So if we don't get to your question, if you have a question out there that we don't get to, feel free to email me. I'm happy to respond to questions or feedback directly through my email. So it's on screen. Feel free to shoot me a question.
And let me just add, we are recording the session. We'll be sending everyone who registered a link to when that's available online as well. All right. Let me see here. So the first question, will the GP 2015 workflows be available in GP 2012 R2?
They won't. No, what we did for those workflows, the 4 workflows that we have available now in GP 2013 R2, those are the 4 that we created for the new system in R2. And all of the other workflows that were available in the old SharePoint system, those are still available in SharePoint on GP 2013 R2. So you can run both systems using different workflow types in GP 2013 R2. What we're planning for GP 2015 is to include all of those new workflow types So we have all of the workflow types that we've had demand for up to this point, or the key ones, and then getting rid of the SharePoint system. So in 2015, SharePoint system will no longer be available, and we'll have all of those, the 12 additional ones, as well as the four older ones.
So that includes, and there's another question here, just to confirm, that includes POs and requisitions that,
yes.
that would be on SharePoint and R2. Okay.
Right. The PO and requisitions ones, those are available in R2 on the new system. The purchase order one was available on SharePoint, but it is not available on the SharePoint system in R2. So if you're using the purchase order one on SharePoint in a prior version and you upgrade to R2, you would have to switch over to using the new system to be able to use the purchase order workflow.
All right. GP 2015 showed workflows for project expense, but not project timesheet. Will project timesheet be available in 2015?
That's the list that we have available at this point. It may or may not change. Let me pull that list up again. So if it's not on this list, then at this point it is not planned to be released for GP 2015. But what we're doing is we're taking as much feedback as we can on which workflows are most important to customers, and we'll release those as quickly as we can in future releases after GP 2015. So if there are some that are high demand, please email me or go out to MS Connect, the Connect site, and put that out as feedback so we can get votes on what are the highest workflow types that are demanded, and we can get those released in future versions.
Someone asked what technology workflow is built on. Is it a standard platform, or can you speak to what it's built on?
Yeah, absolutely. The workflow engine itself is based in Dexterity code, which is the language that GP is developed in, as well as SQL. So we wanted to remove our dependency on other technologies as much as we could. Because we ran into issues by having such a heavy dependency on SharePoint. So we put it into our code base, we put it on the SQL server. The one piece that is outside of that is for email. You also need to include, if you're going to be doing email approvals, you would have to install GP Web Services. So if you just want the email notifications, you don't need GP Web Services, but if you want to be able to perform an action from email and have that page pop up where you can take action outside of GP, then you need to install Web Services. So those are the three technologies that we have it based on, is the Dexterity, GP code, SQL, and Web Services.
Okay, I'm going to take a few questions from the chat that came in sort of in a separate stream here. Is there only one workflow per type allowed?
One workflow type allowed?
Per type, one workflow per type.
Oh, no. And you can have as many workflows per type as you need. You can only have one of them active, though. And I'll jump back to GP quickly just to show that. So for this, for purchase requisition approval, I have 4 workflows set up for this workflow type. Each of them can have different steps, different deadlines, different conditions, whatever you need to. They can be different, but only one of them can be active at any given time. So that when I submit a document, it goes to the active workflow. Does that answer the question?
Well, I'll invite, I guess, the person who asked it to chime in if they have follow-up questions on that one.
Okay. Yeah, if there's follow-up, feel free to email me too.
All right. Let's see here. Can only one let's see. There's a question. Can only one person be on the carbon copy notification?
No, you can include as many as you need to. I only included one, but we'll go back and look at that window. For this one, we have the same options that were available. I could start including myself as a carbon copy. Just as many as you need to can be added here. You could add security groups as well, so just blast as many people as you need to.
And can you clarify who users are? Are they all AD accounts, or are they GP accounts and are managers included?
From a workflow perspective, all users are Active Directory accounts.
Follow-up question about GP licensing requirements for that?
Sure. Yeah, and that was for GP licensing. The question, yeah, we do get that question quite a bit. For licensing, you only need a GP license for users who will be logging into GP to take action against workflows. And the license that that person needs is dependent on the windows that they're opening to take action. So workflow itself doesn't have any requirements for GP licensing. So if I'm a CFO and I'm never logged in, or some CXO who never logs into GP, I just want to get the email and take action from email, then I don't need a GP license because I'll never be logging into GP. If I'm a manager who is just looking at a navigation list, you only need a limited user license to look at a navigation list, and I can look at all the documents, mark them, take action, approve, reject, delegate from the nav list. But if I'm a user who has to go in and open up the purchase order entry window, or open up the requisition entry window, or open up another window to take action against that workflow, then I need a GP license that is specific for that window. Whatever license I would have required to open the window is the license that I would need to take the workflow action against it. So it's window-based in GP, not workflow-based. So from an Active Directory perspective, for workflow, we don't have any GP licensing requirements.
All right. I apologize if you've covered this one, but can a workflow manager be an Active Directory group?
Good question. I know we went. I believe you can, but yes, you can. We went back and forth on that when we were designing it. Just wanted to make sure we ended up before I gave an answer, but yes, you can have an Active Directory group as the manager. You can also, if you only wanted one manager but wanted several people that have approval, final approval permissions, then you can add a security group as the alternate final approver.
All right. Is hierarchy set up in AD? What about GP organization information that's on the employee card?
Good question. That was something that we talked about when in designing the system, and when it came down to it, there are a lot of different methods to walk up a hierarchy. There are a lot of different places where organizations store hierarchies. A lot of companies are doing it in Excel, some in Visio, some in the HR employee cards, some in organizational structures in GP. But the one that we came back with that was used most often was Active Directory. It seemed that even if you had the Excel spreadsheet or you're using HR, you were also using Active Directory, and that was the most common one. So that's the one that we went with. If down the road in future versions we see that other hierarchies are needed, we have the code set up where we can set up additional hierarchy models, but that depends on feedback that we get on determining whether or not that's a need. So just waiting for feedback from customers on that. But for now, it's just Active Directory hierarchies.
Okay, if a note field is updated, does a person performing the tasks have visibility into that note field? For example, if we wanted to include an SOP, would we attach it in the note field, or is there somewhere else to attach such a document?
So the question is whether or not an approver would be able to see the note.
Right. Would they have visibility in the note field, for example, including an SOP?
Good question.
Is that the place to attach it, or is there somewhere else to attach such a doc?
Well, you can use either the note field, or we have the doc attach functionality, which I believe is integrated into sales order processing. So an approver would be able to open up that doc attach and be able to see the notes or look at the notes. The limitation that we have for that is that anything that's attached either through OLE notes or doc attach is not included in an email at this point. So if an approver wanted to see that information, they would have to open the GP window to be able to see that information. We aren't able to include attachments or additional notes that aren't specific GP fields. So if it's a note field specifically on the document, you'd be able to see that. But if it's OLE notes or doc attached, those wouldn't be included in an email. The approver would have to open the window to be able to see that.
Okay.
I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, and I would invite the person who asked it to just respond back if it didn't. The next question: Can time be changed on the fly so that if IT is ordering a replacement part, can they instead of 1 day, can they set it to 1 hour? I assume they mean for completing a task.
So at the time I submit the document, I want to be able to set the time limit.
I think that's what it means.
That's a good suggestion, but at this point that isn't functionality that's allowed in the system. So it's all dependent on how you set it up for the step in workflow maintenance. So if you wanted to change the time, you would have to go into workflow maintenance, change the time limit, then go submit the document, then go change it back. But on the fly, it's not there. So I'd like to see that one put out on MS Connect and see how many votes it gets. See if that's a top concern, because that sounds like it would be something we could do in a future release.
All right. Jeff asks, does the approver need to be logged into the network in order to take the approve, reject, delegate action that was available in the email?
Sorry, my microphone went out there for a second.
Oh.
No, you don't need to be on domain. Oh, sorry, I think I heard the question. The question is whether or not the person has to be on domain, logged into a machine on the company network to be able to take action.
Right.
And the answer to that one is no, you don't have to. For you to be able to take action from outside the network, you can do it, but your company would have to have web services exposed outside the network. Which, I mean, we have supported methods for doing that. When I talked to a lot of companies, there was a lot of wariness about doing that. We have supported methods for exposing those web services outside so that you can call in from outside the network as well. So that it is possible as long as you have web services set up for it.
Is there any security setup required for GP web services for workflow approval by email to function properly?
Any security setup was the question?
Yeah.
The security setup is all in your network. So web services is set up on a port on your server. So it would just be the standard network security that you would set up for your exposed ports. So the security would be based on how your network administrator wants to have those set up. If they're going to be exposed outside your firewall, additional security would be needed there. But I'm not an expert on network security. We do have plenty of supported methods and documentation on how to do that, though. So there is security. It's just opening up that network port for your web services. But the details of that we'd have to walk through some documentation to get it all figured out on how you would want to deploy it on your network.
All right. We're about halfway through the questions here. Let's see. I'm going to try to paraphrase this one. How do we link a requisition approval to a GP user when we do not use web services? I think, in other words, how does the system know which requisition to show on a specific user's homepage?
On a homepage, we base all of those notifications based on your Active Directory user. So even if your web services doesn't really play into this, and I think that was part of the question, what we do is for displaying that list of workflow notifications, we go into our workflow tables, find the list of all of the workflow actions that are assigned to you, or any workflow notifications that are assigned to you, your Active Directory user, and then display those on your home page. So web services doesn't need to be installed at all to have those homepage notifications set up.
All right, someone asks, where can we find a detailed manual for these workflows?
We have our standard GP documentation. You can find that out on Customer Source, Partner Source. So those are our documentation manuals, is what we'd point you to for finding documentation on it. If you need help on finding the exact link to those, shoot me an email and I can look it up and respond to that.
Okay. I'm not sure I understand this one. Are document lines in email notification applicable for all workflow types?
They are not. They are for the workflow types that we have available in GP 2013 R2, but there are some workflow types that we were looking at for future releases where you wouldn't necessarily want to have workflow lines in there. So it's all going to be dependent on workflow type. We have specific coding for what those fields are per type. Some may have them, some may not. When we were looking at batches, the line information that we display for batches was difficult because you have several, for example, journal entries per batch, but each journal entry has lines, so we're looking at lines of lines of lines. That was getting pretty difficult. So each workflow type is going to be different in the line detail that we display.
All right. Someone asked, is there a difference as to how SharePoint is used? And I think you've already basically addressed that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if there are more questions on SharePoint, feel free to email me and I can respond to those questions as well. But I think we've covered it a little bit.
Okay, there's a question, where or how do we set up the hierarchy?
Your hierarchies are all set up in Active Directory. So you would talk to your network administrator, the person who's, or system administrator, whoever's setting up your Active Directory. And most companies are going to be using that Active Directory for Windows. You get your company email address through it, and you'll usually have a manager assigned to you in Active Directory. And so we use that manager property to determine the hierarchy. So your manager, and then if we need to walk up a hierarchy, then we get your manager's manager and just go levels up through the hierarchy. So that should all be set up by the system administrator in Active Directory.
Can you talk about if and when workflow will be available for payables documents?
It's on the list for GP 2015, so it should be in the next release. We have payables batches. Payables batch approval is what we have coming out for GP 2015. I've had a request for a workflow type per payables document, so for each check, for each invoice, rather than at the batch level. And if that's something that we're looking for more feedback on, I've had one request for it, but waiting to see how many requests come in for specific documents rather than having it at the batch level. So if that's something you're looking for, go out to MS Connect, the Connect site, connect.microsoft.com/dynamics, I think is the link. Put it out there as a suggestion and throw your vote on it. Or shoot me an email directly, either way, trying to get feedback as much as we can on what the high priorities are for future releases.
Let's see, this person asks, how does a non-GP user enter a requisition?
A non-GP user cannot enter a requisition currently. We were looking at, down the road, having a requisition or a procurement app that's outside of GP for entering those requisitions, but that app isn't available, and I'm not sure what the timeline's like for releasing that. So at this point, the only way to enter a requisition is through the requisition entry window. You need a limited user license to be able to access the requisition entry window. So having a GP user, limited user license to get in and enter those requisitions is required at this point.
All right. Regarding the future vendor workflow, will it only be for new vendors being set up, or will it work for changes made to existing vendors?
It will work for both. So if you create a new vendor, it would have to go through an approval process, or if you change one of the fields on the vendor, then it would kick it back through workflow to make sure that those changes get approved.
What versions of SQL Server can this be used with or be run on?
All of our, good question. I'd have to check our officially supported versions. I know I'm running it on SQL 2012, but I'd have to check on the official version. So if That would be included in our upgrade documentation if you want to look that up, or just send me an email. I can also look it up and send that information to you.
How is mail configured? Is the Outlook client required on the server, or are you using DB mail?
We're using an SMTP server. So you can either set up your own SMTP server, or actually I can show, I'm sharing my screen still, show you workflow setup where you would set up the email information. So I'm just, for this demo, I was just using a, oh, my mouse just died. There we go. I created an Outlook account. I went out to Outlook.com and created a free DynGP workflow at Outlook.com email address, and then used the SMTP at live.com server. So that's an option. It works. I don't know if most companies are going to want to send all of their workflow information through an Outlook.com account or a Google account. Google scans your emails, so I don't know if you're going to want them scanning all your workflow information. But if you want to set up your own SMTP server, this is the information that you would have to have on this screen for workflow setup for setting up the email account. And once this information is entered, this is all you need for that email to work.
Is the web client required for the approval process?
Is web client required for approvals? Was that the question?
Right, that's the question.
No, no. Web client is not required for approvals. Actually, for this demo, we like to use web client for our demos, but for this one, I'm actually using the desktop client. You can use either desktop or web client. Both will work, and you'll have the same functionality with either. So one or the other isn't required. You have the same options with both, with either web client or desktop.
All right, we're getting a few repeat questions here. Documentation for R2. Someone says I downloaded a workflow admin guide, but it doesn't look like it's for R2. Is there an R2 workflow administration guide?
Yeah, there should be. I worked with the documentation specialists that wrote the documentation, so I know it's out there somewhere. I'd have to look it up. But if you're looking for specific documentation, feel free to email me, and I'll talk to our doc team to make sure that we can get the right documentation to you.
Okay. Going beyond GP 2015, what is being proposed for custom workflows? Do they all need to originate from the pre-designed workflows, or I guess from workflow types?
At this point, we're not. We haven't laid anything specific out for originating workflows. If you have suggestions on where you want those workflows to originate from, please make suggestions. I'm mentioning it a few times, but we're definitely looking for feedback for future releases if there are specific things you're looking for where you want to originate those documents from or workflows from. I know we've talked about having being able to originate workflows from apps. So when we come out with a procurement app, if and when, you'd be able to originate the workflow from that app. But other options, if there are other options that you're looking for, feel free to suggest them. We're always looking for that feedback. Someone asks,
I assume GP 2013 R2 workflow types will be available at GP 2015. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. The 4 that we have available in R2 will carry forward to GP 2015.
All right. A lot of licensing questions that I think you basically covered. A lot of document attachment questions. They're kind of all variations on what you've already talked about.
Okay.
And the difference between attaching a document and, let me look at one more here just because it's been mentioned so many times. Can you attach documents as part of your workflow approval process, or is using the standard GP forms notes to attach information the right approach?
I'm sorry, you cut out there for a second. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, can you attach documents as part of your workflow approval process?
Good question. You can attach documents as part of the approval. You can attach documents to to a requisition or purchase order or sales order. All of those can be attached, but and can be reviewed, but you wouldn't set conditions based on that, based on the attachment, if that's the question. The other thing that we don't have is the ability to have the attached document, which was attached through DocAttach, that wouldn't be included in any email messages that are sent out. So if the document needs to be reviewed, the attached document needs to be reviewed as part of the approval process, then the user would have to log into GP and open up the window to be able to access that document. So we've talked about that for future releases. If that's a high priority for you in being able to attach, include attached documents as attachments in the email notification, send the feedback, and we can prioritize that if needed.
Would third-party developers be able to inject their workflow types and details?
Yes. Yep. And when we built the system, that was one of the things. Was one of our focuses, is making it flexible enough that third-party developers can use our workflow engine and attach it to their windows and functions. So we're hoping that ISVs and third parties will take advantage of our workflow and attach that to their windows.
All right. Can you copy workflows between companies?
Yes. Yes, you can. So if you go to in workflow maintenance, up here, if I select a workflow, we have the copy button. When I click copy, you'll just say, give it a description, give it a name, and select which company you want to copy it to. And you can copy it across companies.
All right. Are there any restrictions with new workflows? We couldn't use the current vendor approval because we utilize purchase order enhancements. That's a good question. They're not exactly the same. We tried to stick with pretty close to what our old workflow types were and modified them as needed. I'm not sure off the top of my head if that specific restriction is still included. I don't believe so, but I would have to double check to make sure. If that's, feel free to email me and I can I can look that up and make sure and send you a specific response on that one. All right. Is it possible to set conditions on workflows that are based on custom SQL scripts?
It is not. No. That was something we looked at, but in the time limit we had for building the workflow engine, didn't get to that point in that point of flexibility and customization. So not at this point.
All right. Are there plans to include text messaging notification to mobile devices?
There aren't any plans to, but when we were doing our original research, that was something that didn't bubble up as a priority. But again, if it's a priority, feel free to shoot me an email or make the suggestions and see if we can get votes on it.
I know you may have covered this to some extent, but how is security managed for the users that are not in GP and want to approve a workflow?
So security is managed all based on whether or not they are an approver within the, as stored in the GP tables. So we store who the approvers are for each step for a workflow within a GP table. And when the call comes in through the workflow engine, our workflow engine does a quick check to make sure, or takes the Active Directory user information of who's doing that call and does a check to see if that person has the rights to take action. If the person doesn't have the rights to take action, we reject it, reject the action itself, and say you don't have permissions to take this action. So it's basically just saying, does this Active Directory user have permissions to do it or not, and then taking action accordingly through the workflow engine. Doesn't go through GP security at all at this point. So there's no setup in GP security for it.
Okay. Is there an extra cost for GP Web Services?
Good question. I don't do anything with sales, so not sure off the top of my head what the cost would be or if there is an additional cost, but I could look that up for you. Send me an email, I can send a response on, or put you in touch with the licensing team to see what the cost is if there is an additional cost. I'm not sure.
Can an approver update the document and have the workflow automatically start over if certain fields change?
Yes. But one of the things we originally wanted to do was allow the user to define which fields you can change and send it back through, but we ended up not having time putting that feature in. So at this point, what the functionality is approvers. If I am an approver and I am currently assigned the approval task, I can go in and make a change and then approve, and it doesn't go back through the approval process. But if I'm not an approver, I'm just, for example, the originator, and I realize, oops, I forgot, or I put the wrong amount, I put the wrong vendor, I put wrong information on something. If I go in and make a change while an approval action is already assigned to somebody else, then we automatically recall the document and make it go back through the workflow. So if I make a change to it, we realize we need to have somebody look at those changes, approve those changes, so we recall the document, make it go back through the approval process from that point.
All right. Still have a few more questions here. I know we're coming up on 1:30. Are you able to keep answering questions here? Or?
Yeah, I have time if there's
great.
Still people on the call.
Yeah, there's still well over 100 folks still here. To anyone who is leaving, if you could fill out the survey as you depart, we'd appreciate it. It should just pop up for you. But let's move on to the next question. Okay? I think you may have pretty much answered this, but is the procurement app still going to be still coming out? And do you know anything about the functionality or the cost yet?
That's a good question. I don't have any specific information on that. I know that the information that I have at this point is that it's up in the air right now on when the specific date is. So I don't know that we have a determined date for when that will be available. So I'm not able to provide any specific details on it. I know it's been we've demoed some prototypes in the past, and I believe the functionality is going to stay pretty close to what the original intent was with design and functionality. But as far as when it will be available, there isn't a specific announced date yet. All right.
Can Business Portal's requisition management module be replaced by the functionality in 2013 R2?
That's the plan. We were trying to, with the requisition functionality, moving it into GP, we're trying to move away from the Business Portal requisition functionality. So that was the goal, and we're hoping customers are happy with what we have there.
All right. Well, how would you set up an approval process where you have 3 groups of data entry people, and each group has a different approval process for PO requisitions?
Well, it would depend on what your conditions are for sending it to each of those individual groups. If we want to, I'm happy to walk through specific scenarios. I don't know if we want to do that over the phone, but I'd be happy to walk through specific scenarios if you shoot me an email. You would either set up 3 different approval steps, or you could assign all 3 groups as an assignment, just have them look at them. So we'll have available if you want to send me specific scenarios. I'd be happy to help you set those up.
Can a purchasing comment be included on an email as opposed to just the comment ID?
Good question. It depends on where that comment is stored in the database. And I'm not totally familiar with So I assume you're referring to the comment here, comment ID, and you're looking to attach the comment itself rather than the ID. That's something I'll have to look into. I'm not exactly sure where those comments are stored. If the comment itself is stored as a linked field to the purchase order entry window, then yes, you would be able to attach the whole comment. But if it's not, links to it and the comment ID is just a reference to another table, you may not be able to. But I'd have to look into it and see. So shoot me an email and I'll get a response to you.
All right. Can fiscal approval be based on Active Directory user field on an Active Directory user field instead of a fixed amount?
Can you repeat that?
Can fiscal approval be based on an AD user field instead of a fixed amount?
On an AD approval field.
User field.
User.
I took that to mean like maybe a threshold.
Oh, so the AD user is assigned a threshold, and we would only assign it to that user if the amount is over that user's threshold. Is that kind of that's something that we've had a request for, is being able to assign the threshold to just having a table and a list of users. We don't have that functionality in R2, but I have heard the request before. If you want to add your vote to it, yeah, make the suggestion on Connect, and we'll see if we can get that included. But you can get that same functionality just by setting conditions on the step. It's just it's a different way of getting the same result by assigning the condition to the step for that user. So.
Okay, Jared, I'm going to actually have to step away for 1 minute. Do you see the Q&A block down in the right? If you kind of work your way from that very end, you can probably hit a few more questions here in the short term, and I can come right back.
Hold on.
So, you might not be able to see it with your desktop sharing on, or if you go to the top of the screen, you should see Q&A. Controls at the top center of your screen. Are we losing your audio, Jared? Well, folks, I think just judging from the desktop sharing, it looks like we may have lost Jared's audio here. We are about 30 minutes past the top of the hour. We'll give him another minute here, and then we'll maybe just wrap things up. Thanks again to everyone who's attended. I know a lot of you are still on the line. We appreciate all the great questions today. Again, please do look out for that evaluation survey at the end of the session. But we'll plan to start wrapping up here. It looks like we've lost Jared's audio. Just going to let him know that too. So thanks again for attending. Have a great day.